Now resume.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. I'll begin this morning by picking up on something that was asked by Mr. Wallace and a couple of other administrative matters, if I may. Mr. Bevan, on Thursday, you were asked by Mr. Wallace about the amount of money that CMP received as a result, CMP and Pacific Region received as a result of the Williams report, and you weren't sure at that point. Have you had a chance to determine that?
Yes, I have. The amount that was provided to CMP in the Pacific region was an additional $1.2 million per year, and that funding has been extended past the time allocated for the Williams report through PICFI money being assigned to keep that additional funding going.
All right, so that annual allotment is continuing as we speak then, is it?
That's correct.
And was there any other money that came as a result of PICFI that might be important to know about too?
There's another in the range of $500,000 provided for intelligence-based enforcement.
All right. Ms. Farlinger, in ballpark terms, and you can speak to 2010, 2011 if that's the easiest year to speak to or you're choosing, what's the approximate CMP budget in the Pacific region, do you know?
In 2009-10 and 2010-11, the budgets, the expenditures of the CMP budget were $20 million and $22 million, including the PICFI and Williams funds that Mr. Bevan just talked about.
I wonder if Exhibit 1923 might come up on the screen, please. Ms. Farlinger, I understand that there's two amendments that should be made to update what's in this, and they're on pages 66 and 67 regarding two First Nations and the treaty situation with regard to those. While it's coming up on the screen, I think you have to mind what those amendments are. Can you tell the Commissioner what they are? Or two updates, rather?
Yes, on page 5.
Microphone, please.
Sorry, on page 5, on the matter of the Yale final agreement. It's the
Okay.
third.
My page numbers are different, but that's fine. Yes, the amendment then is what?
The Yale First Nation has ratified in March 12th, 2011. British Columbia ratified in June 2011, and Canada will be, the ratification will be completed when Canada finishes with its legislation.
All right, and then there's one other update, is there?
Yes, I believe it's on the next page. It's the Inshuk Agreement in Principle.
There we have it.
In the case of the Inshuk Agreement in Principle, on the ratification or the initialing of the negotiated final agreement, in 2010, the Douglas First Nation did not support the initialing of the final agreement.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Richards, you're familiar with the various draft Sue Grant papers, of course. I understand that there are some caveats that DFO Science attaches to the production and then the exhibiting of those draft papers in these proceedings. Can you explain that?
Yes, so Mr. Commissioner, these documents were intended to be draft documents, and as such, the contents of them still could change when we finalize and go through the final level of peer review. And I think that there is concern because normally these documents do not become public until they're final. And there may be some concern if some of the material in some of the drafts differs from the final version, that could cause some confusion. So that was the nature of our concern.
All right, and is there yet to be peer review happen?
Yes, there is review that's happening right now on the document, the most recent version, which was dated, I think, August 25th. So that is still not final, and we are hoping to have a final version within the next month or so.
All right, and I take it that the peer review could affect, as peer review does, what the content of the ultimate or the final paper is.
Yes, that's always the case.
All right. I'll move now to some further substantive questions, if I may, and I'm going to pick up and recommence with the question that the Commissioner had on Friday about page 35 of the WSP, where there's two things set out there, that implementation of WSP should be within DFO's existing resource capability and phased in over time, and secondly, it'll depend on the effectiveness of sharing of responsibility with First Nation governance and volunteers and stakeholders and other governments. Ms. Farlinger, can you speak to the plan that exists or the approach that exists with regard to the effectiveness of DFO sharing responsibility with others, First Nations, volunteers, stakeholders, and other governments?
I can speak to it in the sense I can briefly provide some context. Collaboration and co-management occurs at the scale of the activity and must, in its nature, take account of other collaborations, agreements, legislation that occur. For example, we collaborate in the North Pacific Anadromous Fish Commission on a science basis, and we may, with individual First Nations, work on co-management of a particular fishery that is specific to that First Nation as it pertains to the First Nations authorities that they bring to the table and the authorities that DFO brings to the table. So collaboration occurs at all levels and scales in terms of our relationships, and also can be very specific and very different depending on with whom it is, and must always take into account other impacts. The most obvious one is other First Nations, for example, that fish on the same stock or fish in the same area.
And with that, how do you see DFO bringing it together, so to speak, with regard to this effectiveness and sharing responsibility? You've outlined what's being done. How's it all going to come together as you see it?
Well, there are a variety of ways. One is through the process we have begun with the First Nations Forum around the management of Fraser sockeye. We are continuing to advance that process in the sense that it is hoped at the end of that process that we may have some agreement between all of those First Nations that fish Fraser sockeye and DFO on the management of Fraser sockeye as it pertains to the Aboriginal fishery and as it pertains to conservation and other issues around the fishery. In the case of the commercial fishery, for example, we have agreements with individual groups of commercial fishermen in a variety of situations, and the example there as it pertains to Fraser sockeye could be with respect to some of the demonstration fisheries, or on a broader basis with respect to monitoring or other science or sampling work that needs to be done. And on the broader multi-stakeholder and First Nations issues, really it is through the use of our integrated fishery management process, which culminates in the Integrated Harvest Planning Committee, that we bring all the various processes, bilateral processes with constituencies, and our negotiations with individual negotiations and consultations with individual and collectively with First Nations into the integrated fishing plan. And we are continually working to improve that process, which is really the focus of collaboration and brings together the variety of collaborations we will work on with any stakeholder or with First Nations.
Okay. This next question is one of the Deputy Minister, and for Sue Farlinger, and that is whether DFO sees that it has the necessary tools to accomplish management of the fishery and governance and achieving some of what Ms. Farlinger was speaking about. I'll start with you, Deputy, if I may. Do you see that the necessary tools are in place?
I see that many of the necessary tools are in place, but I also think that we need to keep a very open mind for new tools and new approaches as they become available. And so for the moment, yes, we do. But we have to remain open to new ways of doing business and new ways of consulting and new ways of working with the science that we receive in order to best provide the minister with the most fulsome advice.
Mm-hmm. And are there any specific things that you would see would be useful to add to your toolkit?
I think there's potential for modernizing the Fisheries Act in some parts to ensure that there is more room outside of the minister constantly being the final decision point. And obviously that would require significant consultation, and I couldn't prejudge what type of tools we would develop through consultation around that. But I think that there is some room for improvement there.
All right. Ms. Farlinger, did you want to add anything? Or?
I would just say that we work with a variety of agreements that we can carry out within the confines of the Financial Administration Act and the other relevant legislation that we need to be in line with. And over time those evolve, and we continually work with our own department and with Treasury Board to make sure that we understand the evolving context of that and to make the best use of those with respect to agreements with stakeholders, for example, or implementing, for example, the terms and conditions of a cabinet decision like the Aboriginal Fisheries Program. We update the conditions and terms. We look for greater flexibility. So we do have a variety of tools in the toolbox, but as the Deputy said, we're continually looking for improvements.
Okay. Now, Ms. Farlinger, this next question is for you, and I'll turn now to First Nation interests. Could you explain DFO's approach to co-management with First Nations, as applied in the Pacific region anyhow?
Yes. The approach, as I made reference to just a moment ago, is fairly variable, and it's highly specific, depending in many instances on the fish, the stocks, the conservation issues as they pertain to the particular group we're dealing with, whether we're dealing with an individual First Nation or a group of First Nations. Our approach is intended to respect potential and existing Aboriginal rights. Our approach is intended to follow the guidelines of consultation and, if appropriate, accommodation that are set out by the Government of Canada. And of course this pertains to all federal departments, but is very practical and operational in terms of our department and how we do our work. We are continually, as you can see through the documents from the First Nations Forum and the roadmap quote that was described here earlier, we are continuing to work on those co-management agreements to understand what it is they can be, what the scope of those are, how to move those things forward, what kind of information and commitments are required to move that whole co-management framework forward. So it very much is guided by government policy, but it's also very much guided by the conservation and practical issues around the management of the fishery.
Okay, the roadmap that you referred to a moment ago, that's the Fraser River Salmon Roadmap, is it?
Yes, it is.
And that's Exhibit 1220, Mr. Commissioner. I'll now ask, if I may, Mr. Bevan and Ms. Farlinger, about the role that DFO plays amongst other stakeholders, commercial fishers and NGOs and recreational fishers. I'll start with you, if I may, Mr. Bevan. What role does DFO play in that regard?
We have to consult with the various participants in the fishery, whether it's recreational, commercial, or Aboriginal, and in so doing, try to come to a consensus. In the absence of a consensus, information is provided to the minister on the various views, and a decision is taken around the integrated fish management plan. After that has been established, it's our role as well to monitor the catches and to enforce the requirements outlined in the integrated fish management plan in a way that would provide the participants with some confidence that the rules are fairly applied across the various groups, and that their adherence to the rules is not going to be undermined by another group's behavior.
Just briefly, I would say that DFO's role is as the regulator.
All right.
And as the regulator, we need to consult with the various interests that Mr. Bevan referred to. I would also add that in the Integrated Harvest Planning Committee for Salmon, we have, as a result of recommendations from reports and studies in the early 2000s, added the environmental sector, representing the broader environmental interest. And in those regards, the role as a regulator leads to the role to consult, leads to the role to respect potential and existing rights, and often requires us to draw. I think I will just use a colloquial term, draw a line in the sand and be clear that the minister will make a decision, or the department will make a decision, irrespective of whether consensus is reached or not. And often it is that, I guess I would call it best alternative to a negotiated solution that brings people to the table and encourages their participation if they do know that the regulator, for example, for an annual plan, will make a decision. And so that role is a very important one in terms of collaboration and creating consensus where it's possible.
It appears that over the past decade or so, DFO has expanded its salmon consultation processes, and at the same time that there's some criticism from some stakeholders about cost and time spent in consultations. How do you respond to that? Firstly, is that all correct, Ms. Farlinger? And if it is, how do you respond to that?
DFO certainly has expanded its consultation processes. As I mentioned a moment ago, the environmental sector is part of the Integrated Harvest Planning Committee. There are subcommittees associated with that. There are a variety of ways, for example, that First Nations, recreational and commercial stakeholders come to the table. And the bottom line is although it's very cumbersome, and it certainly takes a good deal of our resource managers' time, in my view, those who work on salmon spend at least half of their time in consultative processes of one kind or another, either providing technical support or participating more directly in those processes to gather information. It is necessary because of the broad set of interests, both potential and existing rights-based interests, but also public as well as individual fishing interests in the fishery. So yes, it is cumbersome and it is challenging, but all of those groups have an interest in the fishery and how it's prosecuted. And it is in our interest to have an integrated fishery management plan that is understood by all of those groups and people, so that when that plan is implemented in season, or when the minister may have to make a decision that's different than that plan, the background and the information is commonly understood.
Okay, could we have Canada's tab 19, please, on the screen? What should be coming up, there it is an apparent extract from Fisheries and Oceans website. Do you recognize that, Ms. Farlinger?
Yes, I do. This is a website that we put consultation information on, ranging from the dates of meeting, who we're meeting with, and minutes of meetings, so that people who want to have access to that information to know who has been consulted and when will know that.
Now, if your computer, Mr. Lunn, is like my binder, there's 4 different documents in there, different parts of the website. Is that correct? There's a 1 of 2, a 1 of 3, then a 1 of 10, and then a 1 of 2. We've got a 1 of 1. But am I correct, there are multiple documents?
Yes.
And then, Ms. Farlinger, are those all various parts of the website that have to do with salmon consultation processes in this region?
Yes, they are.
May that be the next exhibit, please?
1926.
Deputy, may I ask you, how is it that we can ensure that there's, I'm turning to science now, how can we ensure that there is relevant and independent science advice within DFO in your view?
Well, as I think you know, we have a very consultative process around science. We have our peer-reviewed process nationally called CSAS, which includes, which is somewhat different, I would say, from other peer review processes, in that we not only have other scientists commenting on our science, but we have stakeholders as well. And that's done in order to ensure that our scientists are asking the right questions and providing the right answers. Independence also comes from the management side, so directing the kinds of questions that need to be posed in order for us to make decisions, but without directing to say thou shalt arrive at a certain conclusion. So we're very clear that we are hands-off in terms of how the scientists do their work. The discussion we had the other day on the title of the document, that's not a discussion that would ever come to the management side of things. That's purely the scientists doing their business. So science, we are constrained, some would say, by potentially not having sufficient funds. That will constantly be an argument, but I suspect that scientists in all circles have that same complaint, whether it's university or a research center or a government. So the funding side is one question, and it's not tied to the independence question. I never question the scientist's independence. I simply make sure that when I am advising the minister on a question, I can say science is clear on this point, A, B, or C, and it comes up the way it comes up without interference from anyone.
All right. Do you see a benefit to having science conduct research in-house?
I do very much, as I said, because funds are limited, and we need to make sure that the science is directed at those questions that are the most pressing, and we require information to make management decisions that have an impact for today and an impact for the future. So yes, there is an absolute need, I would say, as a regulator, for us to be able to, I consider our, and some may disagree with this, but I consider our science and I consider our advice to actually be independent advice, because we have no vested interest. We simply have an interest in providing the best advice we can to the minister. And as a regulator, we have to be able to rely on ourselves to provide that kind of advice.
All right, thank you. Could we have tab 4 of Canada's book on the screen, please, Mr. Lunn? And my question of you, Dr. Richards, when it comes up, is whether you recognize and can identify what this is.
Yes, I recognize this document. It was produced by the Council of Science and Technology Advisors, which was a council that was established in the late 90s, reporting directly to Cabinet to provide advice to them.
And is that in force? I see it's dated 1999. Is it in force now?
Well, very much that it's really an advisory document, not something which is directly enforced, but it has very much influenced our thinking, and very much the principles that are identified in that document are part of our peer review process. And you can see that throughout the terms of reference of what the Deputy just mentioned, CSAS, so the Canadian Scientific Advisory Secretariat.
All right, thank you. Could that be marked as the next exhibit, please?
1927.
May we now have tab 24, please? And again, Dr. Richards, I'll ask you if you can recognize and identify this document.
Yes, this is another document that was produced by the same group in the late 1990s, and it really explains the benefits of having some science capability within government. And I think it's interesting that this was done and produced at a time of challenges to budget and government downsizing, but argues very strongly that governments do need to have some in-house science capability to serve, in particular, regulatory functions, amongst other things.
All right, and if we turn to page 28, before we proceed, I do want to go to page 28, but could this be an exhibit, please?
Exhibit 1928.
Now, if we go to page 28, there's some high-level conclusions or recommendations there, and sorry, page 27. You'll see there around the middle of the page, it says, we strongly believe, I'm looking for a sentence that says, we strongly believe that there's a critical role for the federal government in performing science and technology to fulfill the mandates. And as we're trying to find it, I'll ask you, Dr. Richards, if you could comment on that. Do you agree with that or have a comment on that statement?
Yes, I think that in fact these documents
27 somewhere.
have been quite useful for us and explaining part of what the role is for science within government, and the fact that there are issues, in particular issues that deal with regulation, that is very beneficial for science to be done in-house so that we can be providing timely and effective science advice to senior management.
Okay. There's another quote on either page 27 or 28, and I'm just going to read it to you in the interest of time. It may be on the screen or not. Priority setting in government and across the innovation system should take a more horizontal approach. What's your comment on that, if any?
You're asking me?
Yes.
I think that means that we do need to make sure that we seek to have all the advice on the table. We want to make sure that in order to provide sound science, we need to make sure that we consider all the possible different aspects that could influence that science. And so in that context, it's useful to engage with others and to collaborate with others to make sure that we have the breadth covered. And there's also, because there's lots of areas of expertise, and we've already heard about that, and so we don't expect any one group to be an expert in everything. And to ensure that we do look at a problem from lots of different perspectives, we need a broader consideration.
All right, thank you. During the hearings on May the 5th of this year, at pages 14 and 15, excuse me, the commissioner asked a witness at the time, Dr. Ford, a DFO scientist. The commissioner asked Dr. Ford about science planning between DFO and the larger community of universities or foundations and international organizations and so forth. And I don't need to take you to it, but I'll read part of the extract. The commissioner was speaking and said, I think Dr. Treitz mentioned there are private foundations and obviously universities and others who are involved in a variety of research projects. I'm just trying to get a sense of, is this a scrambled situation in our world of research, or is there actually some game plan here now in 2011 and going forward that takes advantage of all this work that's been done and tries to get a sense of it for the politicians? The gist of that, as I see it, is asking whether there's a process or something that ties it all together. I'll break that question into two parts, if I may. And I'll ask you, Dr. Richards, and then turn to Ms. Farlinger. Is there a coordinating body that oversees this work and/or integrates it, or otherwise a process for that?
There isn't a body that integrates absolutely everything. There's bodies that integrate bits, but not all of it in one place.
All right. Ms. Farlinger, do you have anything to say on that?
My view as a regulator or working in a department that's expected to deliver regulatory programs is improvements I've seen in the science model recently point to processes where there are large questions and where there is a broad field of expertise that needs to be brought in. Processes like the one that was held in June 2010 under the Pacific Salmon Commission are ones that look at a particular topic, take it up to a high level, bring the expertise together, and produce a result that is, what do we know, what are the gaps, and what are our priorities for moving forward. And that information is amassed from a broad range of scientific expertise relative to the topic. Now, the issue with this, of course, is the expertise associated with any particular question or topic is different in the science community. The science community, as you've pointed out, Mr. Taylor, is very broad. And so these things at the moment tend to be convened within DFO science as specific projects to take a look at the perspective around a particular question. And I'm informed by our national colleagues in science that these kinds of processes are becoming more common in DFO science and I assume across government to address broad questions and set priorities. So I think that kind of process really is the evolution of the need, which is more people have more information, people aren't sure what information means, rather than what I might euphemistically call the dueling scientist model of the past, that everybody has their own expert. And so I think these kinds of processes, such as we've seen in Fraser Sockeye, are really key to the broad sort of setting of priorities and identifying key research questions to move forward.
You've really answered the second prong of the question that I was going to put, which is the approach for science research between DFO and universities and private organizations as it relates to Fraser Sockeye. So I think I'll leave that there. May we have number 47 of Canada's book, please, Mr. And of you, Deputy, when it comes up, whether you can recognize this document and what it is. Do you recognize what that is?
Yes, I do.
Microphone, I think.
Oh, sorry, yes, I do.
And what is that?
It's the government, as it states, the communications policy for the Government of Canada.
All right. May that be the next exhibit, please?
1929.
I'm going to ask a question now about instilling confidence, and we're coming close to my time, I can see, although I believe I started at 10:03. I don't know what grace that will get me from Mr. McGowan. But a question about instilling confidence. And I ask you, Mr. Bevan and Ms. Farlinger, I think, if you could turn your mind to catch monitoring and enforcement and speak to how those things can be used to instill confidence in the management of the fishery and the work you do. Mr. Bevan?
Yes, I think particularly when you're looking at a variety of groups that are prosecuting fisheries, each group will have confidence perhaps in their own members' behavior, but when you're sharing quotas among a variety of people, they need to have the confidence that their catches of every group will be monitored, and that there's some confidence that those catch monitors are accurate, and that in the event of non-compliance there will be enforcement applied to the non-compliant parties. So the confidence comes from fairness and transparency in setting the criteria in the fish plans, and confidence that those catches will be accurately monitored, and that in the case of non-compliance it will be dealt with.
All right, Ms. Farlinger, do you have anything to add to that?
I would just say that Internally, our confidence and our ability to assure the public is based on the fact that the science aligns with the management system in place for a particular fishery. And then we must ensure that the management system and the requirements of the management system, that is the conservation requirements and the sharing requirements, all of those articulate with the enforcement strategy for a particular fishery. And so the fact is those are different activities, enforcement and management and science, and all of those things need to articulate and work together. And really internal collaboration is very much the key, I think, to public confidence that I guess the left hand knows what the right hand is doing in the regulator.
All right, thank you. And my last question will be of you, Deputy Minister, and it is, what's your assessment whether it's appropriate or right and proper for the government to be the responsible authority for managing Fraser River sockeye as opposed to some other body in some form?
Thank you. Well, I do actually, and we've thought about this quite a bit through these proceedings and listening to the various inputs, and I've thought about questions of governance for most of my career. And I do believe that when a resource is a common property resource, as are the fish, very difficult to find another body that would be more independent in its management than the government. The government has no vested interest other than protecting today's citizens as well as the citizens of the future. You've heard, I think, over the course of the past many months, ideas from a lot of people within the department, and you can see that I think you saw some fairly high level, some very good quality presentations from departmental employees who take their jobs obviously very seriously, and each of them within their capacity is adding to our quality of decision making for the minister. And no one is perfect, but the more layers we have inside the department that have input into the decision, the better quality the decision will be. The fishery needs to be managed, in my view, in an integrated way. No fish stands alone. They live in a habitat that is filled with other fish, and all of that needs to be considered in all of the decisions that we make. So I do believe that the government is the best place at this point to provide the most independent management of this incredibly important resource.
All right, thank you. And those are my questions, Mr. Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor.
Mr. Commissioner, Mr. Tyzik will be next.
What's the time, Mr. Commissioner?
40 minutes, Mr. Commissioner.
Boris Tyzik for the province of British Columbia, and with me is Clifton Prowse. Good morning, panel. Before I start on my questions on specific topic areas, there's something that came out of the transcript on Thursday, and Ms. Dansrode, you were answering questions of Mr. Wallace with respect to the strategic and operational review and I guess the targets or the budget targets. And I guess as a lawyer, I kind of look at the numbers, and maybe you could help me out here. At page 3, it says Mr. Wallace was asking you about what the order of magnitude was for the reductions, and you said 5 to 10%. And then he asked when these reductions would take place, and you said starting April of 2012. And then the question was, Mr. Wallace says, so that's 5 to 10% annually. That's not a diminishing amount. It stays 5 to 10%. So are we looking at, in 2012 to 2013, 5 to 10%, and then the following year another 5 to 10%?
No, the total reductions will be between 5 and 10% for that 3-year period.
For that, so in numbers I could understand, that's if a maximum of 10% on 1.8 billion would be 180 million, and the minimum would be 90 million. It's 90 million, in that range.
Excuse me. I would say approximately, because again, these are not, these are numbers and targets that we've been given to work towards, but there might be a request of one department to give a bit more and one department to give a bit less, depending on how it all works out based on the proposals.
The next question I want to pose to you is the issue of MSc certification. Mr. Morley, who's a representative of the processors, advised that MSc certification is extremely important to access to foreign markets. And Ms. Dansreau, you made a reference to that in your testimony about one of the activities that the department undertakes in promoting the fishery. And as a result of that process, there was an action plan that to address the conditions for marine stewardship certification. And that's Exhibit 159. Mr. Lund, could you bring that up, please? It's BC tab 8. No, sorry.
It's like a exhibit number.
Yeah, it's tab 1. At the bottom of page 1 and going on to the top of page 2, it says the action plan contains significant commitments for fisheries and oceans to implement over the next 5 years. All of these actions are consistent with plans that are already within the department. It's important to note that the implementation of the following action plan assumes there will be no requirement for additional departmental resources. However, as we initiate implementation of the action plan, we may discover that this assumption was flawed and a reevaluation of the original assumption is required. So my question to you is, where are you in that process? Have you looked at the assumption that the existing resources are adequate?
The action plan is one that is currently being implemented in the department. The various elements of the conditions set out in the Marine Stewardship Council certification for Fraser Sockeye in particular are following the action plan as set out, and we are doing that within departmental resources at the moment.
And do you foresee that you will be able to fulfill those conditions over 5 years within the departmental resources?
Yes.
I believe 959. Mr. Lund, there was this is a summary of the key deliverables. It's our understanding that subsequent to this being done, there was a meeting with the Marine Stewardship Council to review the status of DFO's actions. We've been advised that you're waiting for an audit report to come back. Have you received that yet?
Not to my knowledge.
And we've also been advised that when that report comes back, it will be provided to the Commission and to the participants.
Yes.
Thank you.
The timing of that is that it'll be after the evidence, but that's how it goes.
In the course of your testimony over the last few days, and even today, you've talked about collaboration and collaborative processes. And I believe that you've mentioned, Ms. Farlinger, the ISDF and the Monitoring and Compliance Panel. And I'd like, Mr. Lund, if you could get Exhibit 855, which is BC's tab 8. And then the third page under Forward. The second and third paragraphs. And this report, by the way, is dated October 2010. Second paragraph says, BC salmon fisheries are currently suffering from what might be fairly described as a crisis of confidence. A lack of confidence is in part rooted in concerns over accuracy and reliability of reported catch. Managers, fishermen, and the public at large don't often believe the numbers being reported by other sectors or even by their own sectors. Ms. Farlinger, you alluded to this a bit. Do you concur with that statement, Ms. Farlinger?
We find in consultations and collaborations that the issues of concerns around accuracy of data for others other than the folks we're consulting with arises, which is the reason that in the program, the PICFI program, we focused our efforts in the area of enhanced accountability. And in enhanced accountability, this is one of the prongs of the work that was funded by the PICFI program, was to support the integrated salmon dialogue, and as it moved forward, to support the work of the monitoring and compliance panel that arose out of the integrated salmon dialogue. And this was very much a partner to the process we were doing internally, which is to produce the catch monitoring strategy, which is currently out for consultation. I've made reference to it earlier. And this group focused very much from a stakeholder's perspective on that, and also produced a catch monitoring document as well. So in the sense that we recognize that as one of the challenges, we certainly directed the PICFI program to this area of confidence between different groups who fish. Yeah.
Okay, now you mentioned your document. If we could go to BC tab 9, which is Exhibit 429. I believe this is the document that you're referring to.
Yes, that's it.
Yeah, and Mr. Masson in his evidence said that this document was informed by the Charting Our Course, which is the M&C panel document we had just looked at.
That's right.
And page 6 of that refers to the process, refers to the ISDF and the M&C panel, and indicates that that panel was made up of independent representatives from First Nations, commercial, recreational, and conservation interests, and working together with the department to map a better pathway for monitoring and compliance. You agree with that?
Yes.
Page 20 of that report, under Strategy 6, the second paragraph, it says, to promote the cost-effective and state-of-art monitoring and reporting, it's important to take advantage of best practices and new and emerging technologies for information gathering and management. A collaborative process such as the M&C panel can be used to identify these opportunities. Additionally, the panel can have an ongoing role in looking into ways to coordinate efforts across fisheries and tracking region-wide progress in monitoring and reporting. Is that something that you see a role for the M&C panel in the future?
It's certainly a possibility. I mean, the monitoring and compliance panel, as part of the integrated salmon dialogue process, really was very supportive in indicating to us that at least among some of the stakeholder communities, there are those who believe that monitoring and reporting is a key element to moving forward. As to the ongoing role of the panel, I certainly think it possibly could be useful, or something else like that, yeah.
In that regard, a process like the Integrated Salmon Dialogue Forum, and more specifically the M&C panel, that we've received evidence from various stakeholders, be it from First Nations groups, from the commercial fisheries, and from your own staff. This is a very positive process, a very safe place, and an opportunity where people can work on these broader issues, or in the case of the M&C panel, drill down and do something a bit more specific. So given that positive response, which I don't think we've heard that it's been a frequent occurrence where the commercial fishery and First Nations and DFO have agreed on a process that is being positive, is it your perspective as the senior person in the Pacific region that these types of processes should continue in the future?
Many of the programs in PICFI, including this one, were really intended to test questions and be informative, and for us and for the people involved to gather information and think about ways of moving forward. Inside DFO, we find the results of the monitoring and compliance panel and the Integrated Salmon Dialogue very useful, and are in some ways moving that forward, whether it is in the form of the Salmon Dialogue or the M&C panel specifically, or whether it's taking the results of those panels and processes and moving them forward and integrating them into management, are still things we are working on as we finalize the PIC-FEE program. But there are activities, for example, now on the other side of the ISDF process around governance, where we are taking some of the pilots under the Integrated Salmon Dialogue and piloting, bringing that training into the department to develop it and move it forward. So that's just one example of how we would take a broad, unspecific process like this, specifically set out to have people test ideas in a different environment, how we might integrate that into our ongoing regulatory work and consultation. But that's just one example of how we might move it forward.
Yeah, but again, that is looking at taking what's learned and what has been acknowledged as a positive process and taking it internally. What about continuing that process outside, or is that part of your evaluation that you're going on with? Because you've obviously, from what you've said, derived benefit from those processes of having this collaborative approach.
That's certainly part of the evaluation. What have we learned from this process? How is it that we would move forward? So I wouldn't say we've come to a conclusion on all fronts, but as I've pointed out, there are particular areas in which we've begun to move forward.
I want to go to another area that's completely different, but just to get a sense of the timing, and Ms. Dansreau and Mr. Bevan, maybe you might be able to answer these questions more. From a federal government perspective, if we're looking at developing legislation, how long does that normally take?
It depends entirely on the situation, on the context. Some legislation can take years to develop because the starting point is, or the end point is not really quite known, other than where legislation is required, so extensive consultation will occur. In other circumstances, there can be turnaround in a 2-week time frame. So it really depends on the circumstances themselves and what the requirements are of that change in legislation.
We're going, and I was thinking more of an act. Now, if we're going to a regulation, we've heard some testimony with respect to the possibility of changing commercial license fees, where the comment was that changing a regulation usually takes 3 years.
Well, it depends. It really, again, it depends on the regulation itself that needs to be changed, the degree of consultation that's required, the degree of analysis that's required. Some regulations can be changed fairly quickly, within a 6-month maybe time frame, because we have to post on Canada Gazette 1 and then Canada Gazette 2. So again, it comes back to the degree of consultation that's required and the degree of analysis. On something like a license fee, there would be a need for consultation, because we're talking about people's livelihood. So it would be an extensive process. There might be the requirement for the User Fee Act to be factored in, which could in fact lengthen that process.
Which was my next question. You're kidding. So, I mean, we've heard about this, and it's almost been put up as a bit of a bugbear. Oh, the User Fee Act, we can't do anything. So, has there been much experience within the federal government of having user fees established through this act, and if so, how long has that taken?
There has not been much experience, I think, as you've heard. I think there was one instance last year where it was used. You're right that some people are a bit nervous about how to go about using it, but if it was felt that it was required for us to do so, we would simply just start applying it and go through the steps that it lays out that must be taken. They are primarily steps around consultation and making sure that we've done the right kind of work to argue the case as to why a license fee should be changed.
Okay, and then the last thing would be, we've heard a lot about policy throughout, and I think when did the wild salmon policy, when did the discussion start? 2001?
I think my understanding is 2001.
Yeah, and in 2005 there's
Yes.
a policy, and we're going through. So any policy change, again, depending upon the consultation could take a fair amount of time.
That's right. There are some policies that are fairly straightforward and can be done in-house because the group that is affected by them is small, and we can have consultation with that group. And then we would have our own. We have now, as I think you know, a new governance process inside the department where any new policy gets vetted through a lot of discussion, and that can be relatively straightforward with advice to the minister. Other policies require that we go to cabinet committees because there is more than one minister involved, and therefore that's a bigger, longer-term process.
So in the process of this, if the commissioner were to make recommendations that involved either changes in legislation, regulation, or policy, given the disparate groups that are involved, are you suggesting that depending on what the government would decide to do, that this is a process that could take some time, that this could take months or years?
It's very hard to say. It depends very much on the government's response to the commissioner's report, and some of these things are responded to very quickly, others go into a longer-term process. So it will very much depend on many things over which I have no knowledge or control.
On the topic of legislation, I note in Mr. Lunn, if we could go to BC tab 19. This is the, you recognize this document, Ms. Dansworth?
Yes.
I'm sure you would. And if we could go to a 1.2, I think it's on page 12, Mr. Lunn. Yeah, if you could bring that up.
Is there a particular part of the page?
Yeah, yes, under departmental priorities, about halfway down the page. And you mentioned this a bit in your testimony this morning, Ms. Dansrell, bringing forward a new Fisheries Act. What exactly does the department have in mind at this time, given that, I mean, this is with respect to this?
We would work, obviously, in very close consultation with the Privy Council, the Office of the Privy Council, because that's where the management of any new piece of legislation would occur. And we would, together with them, develop a strategy for determining if this is the appropriate time to bring in a new Fisheries Act, or as I think you may know, a Fisheries Act was introduced twice in the past 5 years and didn't make it through the process of the House. So we need to analyze why that was, and should we be going back to the drawing board to look at some of the provisions within that to determine if there should be more consultation. So those are the steps that we would be looking at this year to determine when would be the right time and what would that Fisheries Act look like.
Now, in that context, we've heard a fair amount about test fishing, and you were asked some questions about that, and the Larocque decision is trying to fix the act to deal with the Larocque decision. What one of the matters that you would be considering when you look at a new act or revising an act?
I can't speak for what might happen in the future. I can only talk about what we had in the draft acts that were tabled in the House previously. And yes, there was a section there that had what was called fish management agreements, and that would allow the government to enter into arrangements with groups of fish harvesters. And that would allow as well for all participants in the fishery to be bound by that agreement. So, for example, if the majority of people in a particular group wish to have an arrangement whereby their members would pay some fees for some aspects of monitoring, control, or surveillance, or science, that would have been permitted under that section of the proposed act. If that's going to be a part of a new act in the future, that would have to be a decision of the minister and the minister's colleagues, but it was in the previous drafts.
And sorry, Mr. Giles, could we get BC tab 19 marked as an exhibit?
This would be 1930.
Thank you. Those are my questions, Mr. Commissioner.
Good morning, Mr. Commissioner. Good morning, panel. My name is Chris Buchanan. I'm Councillor of the Public Service Alliance of Canada, Union of Environmental Workers. And as the panel will know, my clients represent the majority of employees working for the department. and I have been allotted half an hour for my questions this morning. And I don't know if this will come as a disappointment or relief to you, Dr. Richards, but I have no questions of you. So, the first area that I have some questions about are some recent announced elimination of positions with respect to Environment Canada. And I won't be asking you to speak on behalf of Environment Canada, but I do have some questions about how those eliminations of positions may impact the Fraser River sockeye salmon and in particular the DFO's responsibilities. And I'm going to be addressing my question to you, Ms. Farlinger. In the first week of August, Environment Canada announced that it was eliminating 776 positions, which is about 11% of its workforce, with 1/3 of the eliminations coming within the first 3 months, and that these reductions were not part of the Deficit Reduction Action Plan. I have a two-part question to you, Ms. Farlinger. First, have you been informed of what positions are to be eliminated and when? And second, have you made an assessment as to the impact of those cuts on habitat protection on the Fraser River sockeye salmon, including whether that will make any difficulties with respect to your department with respect to enforcing its obligations?
Thank you. I have not been informed of particular positions that will be cut.
And obviously then, or when. And so you can't provide us any assurances, at least from the DFO side, that there won't be some impact on your ability to work with Environment Canada on your cooperative approaches for protection of habitat.
No, without the information, I wouldn't be in a position to do that.
All right, I'm going to ask a question about some of the testimony last week, and I'm going to ask this of you, Ms. Dansereau. And at the beginning of your questions from Commission Counsel, you had indicated that there is essentially a review of core duties of the department that's underway, and I think you'd indicated that you viewed this to be something that should happen on an ongoing basis, but in particular as a result of the Deficit Reduction Action Plan that you're underway with that now. And so my question to you is, since you've been in the department since 2008 at a very high level, and that you've obviously been very alive to the issues with respect to the Fraser River sockeye salmon and the issues with respect to the Pacific region, can you tell us what, if any, activities that are currently underway with respect to the Fraser River sockeye salmon do not fall within DFO's core duties?
No, I can't actually answer that. We're currently in the process, as you know, and the process is not yet finalized.
I understand the process isn't finalized, but you're part of the process and you've been around for a number of years, and you've undoubtedly asked this question of yourself before today. And so is there not anything that you can identify that is not part of the core duty of DFO with respect to what it's currently doing with the Fraser River sockeye salmon?
No, I can't answer that question.
Okay. Let me try Ms. Farlinger with a different question, but see if I get any more success. Would you, in your view all the current activities with respect to the Fraser River sockeye salmon performed in the Pacific region as falling within the core duties of the DFO as you perceive them?
There's a wide variety of activities we do to regulate the Pacific salmon fishery, or in this case the Fraser sockeye fishery. And I should say that continuously, certainly since my time in the department in the late 70s, we have continued to refine and evaluate and make sure that those processes are up to date. And I would just say that all of the outcomes we have to provide are definitely the same, and we continuously are moving and changing priorities and processes to make sure that we can provide those outcomes. And I don't think I can be any more specific than that.
With the current mandate of DFO, is there any current activities with respect to the Fraser River sockeye salmon that is not core to those duties that you can identify?
I think it's, as you've heard over the last 10 months, there's a variety of activities, really an amazing and diverse variety of activities that pertain to Fraser River sockeye. And I would just say that all of those continue to evolve, and we set priorities on them in terms of the issues, the conservation challenges, and other challenges of the day. And those things do and have changed over the last 20 years, and I expect will continue.
Okay, well, I may come back to that if time permits, but I want to turn to a different area, and that's the reports on the plans and priorities of the department. I'm going to ask some questions of you, Ms. Stansrow. As I understand it, this is a report that's provided to Parliament, correct?
Yes.
And it is a statement by the Minister to the Canadian public through Parliament as to the priorities of the department, as well as the amount of money that is anticipated needing to meet those plans and priorities.
Yes.
Fair to say?
Yes.
Okay. If I could just have Exhibit 1922 put up on the screen. And if you could turn to page 21 of 56. And if you see the bottom graph there, you'll see a 3-year forecasting of the budget. And I understand there's a complex budgeting process by which the ultimate number is arrived at. I'm not going to ask you those questions, but is it fair to say that this report is telling Canadians that the minister views that he is able to accomplish all the plans and priorities set in the report on the planned spending for 2012 and 2013?
Against this budget, yes.
Okay. And I have a question with respect to the interplay between this and the Deficit Reduction Action Plan. So, as we've heard, you've got an exercise in which you have to do a 5 to 10% reduction. And my question to you is the 5 to 10% reduction based upon the numbers found in this document, so 5 to 10% off of 2011, 2012, or is it off of current spending?
The 5 to 10% will be over the next 3 years, as we've said. So these numbers will likely look different in next year's report on plans and priorities.
Okay, so those reductions would be on top of the reductions already set out in this chart. Fair to say?
Yes.
So, and again, my rough math is there's a 25% planned reduction between now and 2013 and 2014. That could be anywhere from 30 to 35% reduction, barring any changes.
These numbers are we need to spend a lot of time working through the process for these numbers, but some of them include, we have removed, for example, if I remember correctly, we always remove the sunsetters that would not be coming necessarily because they're back on the table. But the thing is, we don't know if they're coming back on the table, so they must be removed from our forecasted spending. Whether or not the budget will go up by a certain amount as a result of getting them back into the system is hard to say. So these numbers are very precise, but not necessarily always reflective of the work that's ongoing in terms of preparation for next year.
That's right, but this is a guiding document upon which the government, the minister and the department plans its resources and allocations of resources, right?
Yes.
And so presently it's planning for a 25% reduction, and over the 3 years between now and 2013, 2014.
There are pressures that we need to be absorbing, as you know, on the where there were no increases given to budgets for operations, even though collective agreements had gone up, and there were monies taken out as a result of strategic review and various small amounts. There are some. We do not have a 25% reduction in our budget, but there are elements taken out at this point that may be reintroduced as we get other monies through various sunsetting programs.
Right, but at this point you have no assurances from the Treasury Board that you're going to see any of those use money.
Very
Okay,
true.
Thank you.
Yes.
I'm going to turn to a different area.
Just before we leave this document, perhaps just to clarify the record, in the question, reference was made to page 21 of the document. It's actually page 17 of the document. It's the PDF page that's 21, just for the record.
Thank you, and I'll in the future try to give both references. If I could pull up have you pull up, Mr. Lund, pull up Exhibit 19, page 14 out of 16 of the PDF, which is page 12 of the document. And my question is to you, Ms. Farlinger, and I realize it may be a bit hard to see. In the middle, if we were playing tic-tac-toe, it would be the middle left and eligible to retire. And this is a departmental number that shows by 2014 some 40% of present DFO employees are eligible to retire. And I believe there was an earlier calculation that showed by 2013, 31% were eligible to retire. My question to you first, Ms. Farlinger, is do you believe that to be kind of representative of the Pacific region as well? The 40% or so eligible to retire by 2014?
I don't have the exact number for Pacific region in my head at the moment, but it is certainly a significant proportion of our workforce that will be available to retire. Whether it's 30 or 40, I can't exactly remember at this moment, but it's certainly in that range.
I think the department has identified potential turnover and potential recruitment as two very important issues that it faces over the next several years. Is that fair to say, Ms. Farlinger?
That's right.
Okay. And can you tell us what specific steps has the department taken to address the impending turnover of staff with respect to maintaining expertise, knowledge of the department and its responsibilities?
Well, there are a variety of steps that have been taken at different levels of the department, and I can only speak to the programs in Pacific region, of course. For example, both the Fisheries Management Branch and the Ecosystems Branch, which comprise a large number of our employees, as well as the Science Branch, have a human resources plan that includes a significant succession planning component. In each of those plans for those program areas, you will see elements like mentoring, job shadowing. You will see the documentation of historical job responsibilities. You will see programs to have new employees be exposed to these elements, and whether they're mentored with senior employees or whether they're actually given explicit instructions about how tasks get carried out. We have, for example, in the Habitat program, very extensive process documentation available to each and every existing and new employee, setting out how various regulatory processes take place. And in the case of fisheries management, a similar process, although the regulatory processes are different. So it's generally those kinds of processes that we have in place to deal with potential retirements. We do have in Pacific region a pretty clear evidence that people will or may, well, they certainly may, and they will often choose to stay beyond retirement. So this is a kind of a maximum number that we're looking at.
And just to complete this area, is it fair to say, in your experience, Ms. Farlinger, that part of the reason people stay and you have a lower turnover rate than other governmental departments is there's a strong commitment by DFO employees as to the maintenance of the public resource for the public good? Is that fair to say?
That's certainly my personal experience working at DFO.
I'm going to turn to a different area, but perhaps now's the time for a break.
Hearing no recess for 15 minutes.